Hi, I'm Machiavelli. I've been around esports so long they call me the Myth, and I'm welcoming you to Thorin's YouTube channel.
It's time for another edition of my Patreon video AMA, which in theory is monthly. Obviously, I haven't been able to keep up with that for, well, quite a while actually, but we're going to catch up on all that, and I guarantee actually from now on it will be monthly. I've found a method by which I'm pretty sure it'll never miss another month, and we'll catch up on some of the past ones. In fact, if you're someone out there who was any of the notable contributors over the months, I'll be reaching out to some of you even who aren't actually subscribed to the Patreon anymore, and you can submit a couple more questions. I'll have a way that people can kind of catch up for questions they missed. Obviously, you won't be asking questions that you would have asked like a year ago. This will be a question for now, but again, you'll get your opportunity still. Now, the first question is from Hands on Keyboard. He says, I have noticed your appreciation of the Chinese mid laner Somnus, formerly Maybe. What do you enjoy about his play and what caused this attraction? Right, for anyone who's unaware, because the mid laner part might throw you, he's actually talking about Dota 2 here. This isn't League of Legends. Now, Somnus, I think of him as Maybe, has been the mid laner for a long, long time of the LGD team. Formerly, he was even at one point in time moved down to CDEC, which is kind of like their farm team at one point in time, even though obviously what's ridiculous is like TI5 or whatever it was, the one in 2015, actually the farm team actually outplaced the fucking main team and almost won the tournament, but that was when maybe he had gone back over to LGD. Now, one thing I enjoy about him is, first of all, as you've seen in most games, my favourite players tend to generally be really hard carry players from the traditional carry position. So in Dota, that is largely going to be the 1 and 2 positions, carry and mid, and even though I have a massive affection for really, really powerful carries, classic example being Burning, I also enjoy, just as in League of Legends, I enjoy mid laners who are carries and have their own distinct style. My favourite player in Dota 2 for a long, long time was the mid laner of IG, which was Ferrari 420. Now, this was a guy, what a fucking amazing player, right? What a sick guy. One of the strongest carries ever. Your whole team is based around him. His consistency level's bonkers. He could play a million things. That was a long time ago. To me, Somnus is like the modern day replacement heir to the great Ferrari 420. Is it actually 420? Is it 430? Why do I keep saying that wrong? Obviously, they have very different playing styles, to be fair. Like, I think of Somnus as more of a guy you absolutely load everything into him, and he's going to carry hard a lot of the time. And he's actually even someone where traditionally, his carry doesn't even have to be as strong, actually. He does so much work himself. And I think he's actually now overtaken Burning for the status of the best player to never win TI. He's better than loads of people who've won TI. And quite frankly, he could absolutely have won 2 TIs in a row, the 2 that OG won. I would actually say that the way he played in the final of, and upper bracket final for that matter, of the second to last TI, I genuinely think he deserved to win that TI, and he should have been the MVP if he had done. Now, yeah, people will say, like, what about FY? Like, shouldn't he have been the MVP? Yeah, I wouldn't have minded that either. I could have gone either way, but my point is, that's how good, like, he was one of the top 3 or 4 players in the entire tournament, even coming second that year, and then obviously didn't make the final the next year. I've always enjoyed interesting stories. Like, he's someone who had like the mad talent in public play, then he got his initial chance in LGD, then they put him in the farm team, then he came back up, and eventually you build the entire team around him. He's no longer just joining a good team or just joining the Zhao 8 project. Now he's got a whole team around him, so there's a lot I enjoy about him as a player. Thomas Bushell asks, do you think in a sport like MMA, a recent loss on an athlete's record makes them unable to be a GOAT, as in greatest of all time? Also, did your unstoppable streak ever end, or is it still going? Right, we'll answer this in order. So in terms of the MMA aspect, and does a recent loss make them unable to be a GOAT? No, like, I don't know how long you followed MMA, so I'll just assume here you have a very casual understanding, knowledge of the history of the MMA. Every single great fighter in the history of MMA, as far as I'm concerned, has lost a fight legitimately. Like, listen, I don't care what anyone thinks. I actually do think, I've watched the fight many, many times back, I think it's absolutely reasonable to edge and give a decision win to Gustafsson over John Jones. So even the mighty John Jones, one of the only people who could have gone undefeated. I mean, listen, let's be real. I do think that Fedor could have gone undefeated if he just retired at the right point in time. I'm not counting that no contest, obviously. I also personally think that GSP lost to Hendricks just with the way MMA is counted. Listen, in a fight, I think JSP is better, but I think with the way the rules work, actually Hendrick should have been awarded that win. So as far as I'm concerned, every GOAT candidate has lost. BJ Penn's lost 1,000,000 times. GSP even lost as far as I'm concerned, even though it's just a traditional loss. In fact, that ties into something, right? One of the reasons why a loss doesn't stop you being GOAT is because, first of all, they happen to everyone. Secondly, I think it's less, whether you're a GOAT is about the performance. It's not about the raw results, because this isn't like basketball where me throwing the basketball into the hoop is what made me win the game and I get more points. This is like if we both played and I scored 100 points and you scored 90, but they had some weird rule set where they could say you won the fight with 90. Like in the scenario where I'm describing Gustafsson winning. So I'm not really a fan of that, actually. So I would say, personally, I look at performance more. That's what decides whether you GOAT to me. So, for example, I don't mind you losing if you have an amazing fight or you do really well in it. Or it's just a loss that could happen to anyone. Maybe it's just a direct style counter to you, as happened to Anderson Silva. I mean, I don't mind having someone picking Anderson Silva as the greatest of all time. This guy's lost a whole fucking gang of fights. He literally got beat up twice in a row by fucking Chris Weidman, who's nowhere near a GOAT. Certainly a very good fighter in that division and has some historic wins, but he's not a GOAT. He's not Anderson Silva. So does him beating Anderson Silva make him better than Anderson Silva? Does Anderson Silva losing to him somehow make George St. Pierre better than Anderson Silva? See, that's a problem. I don't think transitive logic works very well in MMA, and the weight class thing is also a big deal. So I'd prefer, generally, in MMA, you probably have a GOAT for each weight class. I think that's just the easiest way to do it. Otherwise, you're getting really into the weeds of trying to figure shit out. Also, in terms of, and I'll also add, since it's an entertainment sport, it's not about having an undefeated record anyway. Like, if you want to see what having an incredible record gets you, just go look at fucking John Fix before they shipped him off to Bellator. It's outrageous that this guy wasn't getting an extra title shot. But that's the problem with the sport. He wasn't considered a draw. He wasn't considered someone that entertaining. People didn't want to see him fight GSP again, who was obviously the perennial champion at that point in time. So I understand it. I'm not a fan of it, though. So you can see people can skip. I mean, fucking Conor McGregor, he could probably get fights of a loss every time. He's such a big draw, right? Meanwhile, there's people who have to win 3 or 4 fights just to get that title shot, even if they beat killers. Even when they beat the killers, people are still like, but is he really that good? I remember that Kevin Gastelum guy. Again, because he's not someone whose physique looked like he should be a monster. This guy had to win 1 billion fights before they put him anywhere near the belt. Even though he's beaten all these top guys who definitely, by the way, if you know the way MMA works, if they'd have beaten him, that would have fast-tracked them to the top because Dana White and the UFC fucking wanted those guys there. Now, in terms of did my unstoppable streak ever end? Come on, homie, let's be real. Like, remember, I did something mental like over 100 days in a row now. So yes, it definitely ended. And I've never done anything close to that again. Not particularly because it's something that's like a regret or anything along those lines. Like, I was trying to do that streak for a very particular reason, and once it got really big, I thought, let's see how long I can extend this, and so it became a little extra personal challenge that even when I was at events, here's a way I can succeed in an additional way that day, along with other things I'm doing. So it's just not something that is a super high priority for me right now. I'm actually now trying to have certain days where I do my work, and I'm very diligent in that sense, but then have days entirely where I do not do any work. I make myself not do work, which actually has been pretty hard for me due to the work I think I built up over the years and just the drive that I have to create content. Paul Villa, or Villa, I don't know if he's Spanish or not, says, what are your recommended materials for those seeking to learn about coaching, books, videos, etc.? Right, the interesting thing about this topic is from reading a lot of books, a lot of biographies, particularly hearing a million stories, having a good memory for trivia and little details and anecdotes from sports, and then having my own experience in the esports coaching world and even being friends with many, many coaches and having many on my talk shows. The biggest problem is I actually don't think that there's anything along the lines of a guidebook or any kind of a good book that would teach you the literal fundamentals of coaching. To me, what you're trying to do is it's the same as being an artist. You want to look at other artists that you think are really, really good. And the way you take inspiration is not to say, I'll just copy what he did. That's not inspiration, that's just copying. What you do is, what inspires you is the spirit of what they did or how good they were at it or a certain bent that they put on it. Now, what you do is you look at that and ask, when I subtract the part that is them and is not me, what remains or what way did they do it? It's more their process, their method that you're looking for as an artist. That's where you're going to get your inspiration. That's where you're going to maybe figure out some secrets that when applied to your game is actually different to how they applied it or how it manifested in their work, but that's how you take them. That's how you steal if you're a genius, essentially. So to me, essentially what I'm trying to get the point to is I think the kind of books and materials you want to be looking for are more things that give you a sense of someone's experience in the field, someone's philosophy for it, how they model the players they have, developing players, bringing in new players, signing players even. These are the areas I think it's going to help you essentially philosophically and build it up from first principles. Because as far as I can tell, all the great coaches have their own style, their own model, their own philosophy, and they're largely a product of their own experiences. And you have to be the one who goes through those experiences to get yourself to that elite level. So I'll just give you a few off the top of my head, though. I will say I would go and read The Art of Learning by Josh Waitzkin. It's just an interesting book about how people learn and how people think. It's about a guy who was a chess prodigy, later on started playing, doing like Taipei, I can't remember what it's called now, like Shove Hands or whatever the fuck that's called. Then he eventually actually did BJJ, but that was after his time. That wasn't in the book. There's the one called The Inner Game of Tennis by, I think it's called Timothy Galloway. Again, it's a book about how to think in your mind about the game and how to structure it and how to beat opponents. Another one, I would say a whole bunch of sports biographies have elements of this. So Phil Jackson's books, the big problem is a bunch of them kind of retread a lot of the same ground in anecdotes. He kind of milked them for cash on that. I'm a little bit disappointed in that sense. But the best one for my money has got to be like, isn't it called like something hoops, sacred hoops, I think, like Lessons of a Road Warrior or something, which kind of takes his personal philosophy in life and in basketball and then applies it and shows how in different specific cases with the 90s Bulls, for example, he was able to apply those techniques and gain success, and then thoughts on how teams operate and how they develop and what you do, plus all that sort of stuff. I'd also say another good example, probably quite an underrated one, would be the book Winning Ugly, which is a book by, I actually can't fucking remember the guy's name now. It was a guy who, he actually does the commentary on American tennis broadcasts, and he was an American tennis player who was nowhere near an elite player. He was actually a player in terms of the skill set, he wasn't even that good, but then he just used this style of winning ugly, like basically learning how to win as opposed to how to just play, and how to grind people out and how to play to their disadvantages and to your strengths and to cover your own weaknesses, all these concepts. The key area that this guy really killed it was he later on became one of the coaches of Andre Agassi, and when he took Andre Agassi's insane talent level and skill set, very unique skill set of returning, and then taught him this mentality, that's basically one of the factors that is credited as to why Agassi was basically on the back end of his career, when at the time tennis players didn't win at that age. He won most of his Grand Slams on the back end, actually, not on the front end when he was the insane talent and the celebration of the tennis world. So I would say you want to look into these sorts of things. And also, when you have these people, look up interviews about them, look up documentaries about them. If you want to learn something about how to deal with superstar players, I maybe suggest watching the Kobe Bryant's Muse documentary. That's got a lot of interesting information in there. Shantanu Pawar says, do you think the application of the concept of ring champion versus lineal champion, he's referring to like combat sports like MMA here, as applied to CS, would have taken away the disagreement within the community, even some analysts, as to who the real number one team in the world was? And then he gives the example of when Liquid and Astralis around June 2019, when it was still doing debates. This is before we had ESL1 Cologne, where people were still trying to claim that Astralis was secretly the best, even though they fucking eventually bombed like ECS. And even though Liquid was in and everything, everyone just claimed, it's just because Astralis isn't there, which obviously we found out the next two times they played. The next time they played, rather, Liquid won, and Liquid won them all those tournaments, while Astralis didn't. Now, the concept of ring champion versus lineal champion is the ring champion, I actually don't know that term, so I'm going to assume it's the guy who has the belt now. Lineal champion, as far as I know, is the concept that you have to actually beat the guy who was the former champion to take the unofficial world championship belt yourself. So essentially what he's saying here is, because Astralis wasn't attending the non-blast tournaments, and it wasn't until ESL Pro League Season 9 that they actually came to the same tournament, like proper tournament format, as Team Liquid. Obviously, Liquid win all those tournaments. They hadn't yet beaten Astralis. And even though Astralis hadn't been active, they were considered still the champion because no one had properly beaten them. Now, the problem with that is, by that logic, the lineal champion, and you yourself are missing something, mate, is that would actually make Astralis not the lineal champion, because Ents already beat Astralis in the final of Blast Pro Series. I think it was Madrid, right? So that would already take Astralis off being the lineal champion. Now Liquid would just have to play Ents and beat them, right? So actually, Liquid would have been number one even before this time period, from what I remember. But let's imagine it was Astralis just mentally in people's mind. No, I don't agree that's a concept. Like, I think that's bullshit, that whole thing from MMA of like, you gotta beat the champion to become the champion. No, you don't. Like, if I even just edge you on a decision, I'm the champion. You lost. You lost a decision fight. There's no nonsense like I have to knock you out or convincingly beat you. Because guess what? So many of the champions themselves didn't have to do that to get to the top. That's just some old, like, boomer fucking logic as far as I can tell. So I hate that. Whoever's winning the most tournaments now is the best team within certain contexts. And you'd have to really do a lot of mental gymnastics, as fuckers did at that time, to explain why the team winning everything isn't actually the best, and the team doing nothing, not even attending tournaments, and in fact not beating people is the champion. So no, I'm personally not very interested in that lineal champion thing. I think if you just go and look how they applied that in like StarCraft 2, it was very stupid, because it ended up with scenarios where like the unofficial world champion would be some fucking guy in NA because he got an upset at a weekend tournament over a Korean guy, and meanwhile the guy winning GSL Code S wasn't the lineal champion, he couldn't even fight the other guy because he'd have to have gone to a Western tournament. So there was months and months where some fucker in NA would be like Polt or Bomber or something would have been the lineal. Like, this is just garbage. Like, it's just not interesting to me. If it's fun for you, have at it. It's just not of no interest to me. To me, it's just a way to try and crown the person you want to be the champion if you can. Fob, I will not win. I assume that's what IWNW stands for. Says, which cause/teams contributed the most to CS as a franchise? 1.6 source, go. And which of popularity, success, or tactics improvement be the most important factor towards your choices as a historian and as a fan of the game between the latter two? If protracted, feel free to cut. Yeah, I mean, I can do it anyway, mate. I don't need your permission on that, but whatever. Fair enough. At least it was polite. Let's see. The most to the franchises. Right, I didn't follow Source very much, so I will just say for that one, we're going to say the core with Existence and Smiths in the end of Sources. They won some like an outrageous amount of lands, so that's the only one I'm really aware that would definitely be in there. And tactically and skill-wise, they were supposedly unbelievable, because even people like the IGL Existence was actually a banger AWPer. Then let's go into the games I do know. So in 1.6, I mean, the good thing here is I basically did an article towards the end of 1.6, I'm going to say maybe in 2011, after Na'Vi had won the 4 majors, where I actually basically gave my account of who the best teams ever were from CS 1.6, and then actually on that one made the mistake back then of just trying to just present the thoughts and then not decide the one that I thought was the best. So the teams I put forward was the SK Gaming team of 2003, the one with Heaton, Party, Fisker, Spawn, Arl, and Element, depending on what points in time. This was a team that obviously, like, at one point in time, they were like 42-1. They won something like 8 tournaments in a row. They won like 3 majors. Like, this was outrageous, this team. Incredible team. You can go look at this article up on SK Gaming, by the way. I don't know what the search term will be. If I can think of it, if I can find it, I'll put it in the description box here. Then there was the Poles, who obviously won like the 6 or the 5 majors. I think it's 5 or 6, depending on if you count IEM first season, which I don't personally. Obviously, their main thing was just winning majors. They weren't actually as good outside the majors, so I kind of don't really count them as much. And they won that many because they just kept their lineup together way longer than the others, as obviously some of those players would later do in Virtus Pro and CSGO. Maybe I should give some analysis of the teams as well. So SK Gaming was an incredibly high skill level team. Like, in terms of the skill, back then, making phase style teams was basically the thing. The only player they had who wasn't really a phase style player, there was 2. One was Arl, who was kind of the prototypical support player in CS before that term existed, incredibly good at that. And then Element wasn't really like a monster frag. He would still get his numbers, but it wasn't like raw aim that would do it. But it was more of a phase style, like looser style, and then you run some basic tactics, and then you just have the best players in the world and you win the tournament. Then you come through, that was obviously 2003, you come to the Poles, which is 2006 onwards. What I loved about those teams is, I think their lineups really stressed team play. That's why having the experience factor over your opponent that you played together for 3.5 years and they played together for 9 months, or in certain cases less if they've replaced a player, that's a massive edge to have on people. And that's why I think they were able to win so many clutch games in the pressure moments of the majors, where other people, that's the biggest match of their life and they lose it. Whereas these guys, that's where they sort of feel more comfortable. They get an edge over you. Then I had the MTW team, the Danish team of, I should probably name who these players are actually. So the Poles is Neo, Taz, Cuban, Luke, there's 4, and then Lord, that was the 5. Then if we go to the MTW team, the Danish one, that was the team with Wimp and MG and Ave and Sunder and Zonic. And this team was just incredible because it was one of the most competitive years and they won the most tournaments, I think like 5 or 6, including a major. And the consistency throughout the year was incredible. They very rarely ever placed outside top 4. They had some bonkers win rate, like 77% map win rate against like the entire field of World Counter-Strike. They just were the best team against the majority of the top team. They were just an amazing team there. And the key thing about that team for me is that was a heavily tactical team. And I would say their second best quality was actually having strong team play around that, because people like Ave, Zonic, and Sunder were very much on the same page. No, sorry, not Sunder. Wimp, rather. They were kind of like the team play core. And then you had MG was this very unique small bomb site anchor. Sunder was like the lone AWPer, but who would interact with the tactician in terms of where he was set up. So you had a very strong team play core there. And then what's interesting is that's one of those teams I describe as they have just enough skill. Because I don't think Sunder was ever the best player in the world. I think any of these players at the time and they were in this line were ever the best player in the world, or even top 2 for me. But what was crazy was the reason they were able to beat some very, very good Swedish and Polish teams, etc., is because they had enough skill to make their team play in the tactics, make them put them over the top and be the absolute best team. So much like the Mouse Sports team of the same year, they had a very nice skill distribution as well. Like the worst player on these teams still frags decent. Ave could frag within his own tactical system. There aren't really as many weak spots in these teams. Then I would go to the Fnatic team in 2009. The next year, they were like the ultra FaZe clan type team, because now, just like in CSGO, Neo and Taz went from being stars in 1.6 to being the supportive elements. They basically were just following the game plan of what Khan and DSN already did. 2006 to 2008, Khan and DSN are arguably, after the tentpole 2006, the second and third best fragging players on the Fnatic team with Forest, etc. But then, when in 2008 they had a really difficult year where they didn't win that many titles and they weren't actually that close to being the number one team, and MTW was reckoning with tactics, what they did was they went ultra FaZe clan style. They moved Khan and DSN to more supportive roles. They brought in Get Right and Gux, mad fragging like up and coming players, and they still had Forest, who was one of the best players in the world. So at this point in time, they had a monster lineup. They didn't need to have crazy tactics. I think they actually had some of the weakest tactics of any great team. I'd put them there with the SK 2003 team, but they didn't even have the genius of element. Khan was just a very good by-the-book basic caller around a loose style, and then he could frag and win clutches himself. So the key thing in that team was you had amazing offensive power, and then on the CT side, you just frag people's heads off and you use Swedish team play. So mainly that team was about like decent amount of team play, almost the most skill you're ever going to get in a team, and then not particularly much tactics, but they didn't need it. They were actually destroying the MTW team, because they would, while the MTW team was waiting to set up, think of how like Havu or Astralis play, very slow style. These guys would just attack them from the CT side and fuck them up instantly, or on the T side, they would just run in dry, or with one flash, where everyone else would throw the flashes. And one of the things MTW in 2008 had been amazing at was the counter flashes. They always had that protocol down. They were able to stop a lot of rushes that way. So they're definitely up there. Then you have, I think there's only one more team we need from 1.6, which is the Na'Vi lineup, which won the 4 majors in a row and was in 5 major finals in a row, and then 6 out of 7 major finals in their history as a lineup. So that was the team with Marklov and Edward and Starix and Zeus and Senya. Now, what was great about this team was, this is a lineup that I feel like had like, of the teams we're talking about at the moment, they were certainly above average in terms of skill, because Marklov was unbelievable. Edward is one of the most skilled players ever. Starks is a solid like hybrid. Senya was like not a great fragger, but wins clutches. And Zeus as an IGL could sort of frag a little bit, sometimes frag out, and also good IGL. So in terms of skill, they not only had good skill, but they had good skill for all the roles. They had all the roles in the game. Team player wise, I thought they were decent. I never thought they were like the best. Tactically, I thought they were like slightly better than people thought. I thought they were good. I do think MTW was better in that sense, but they were good enough in the team play and tactics areas that having enough skill. And then crucially for me, they were a very, very clutch team. They won all these amazing majors. So of those teams, I personally think I would actually go with either Na'Vi or MTW as the best ever. You can make a case, in my opinion, for all of them except the Pole, because I think the Pole's already got there by playing way more than everyone else. Like, if any of these teams played 3 or 4 more years, I think some of them have a similar amount of majors. In fact, Na'Vi got almost as many majors as the Poles in like a fucking just over 12 months or something mental. So in terms of CSGO, I'll just do a few here. I won't do too many. I'll do a similar amount maybe. So we've obviously got the NIP team at the beginning of the game with Get Right Forest, Freiburg, Exist, and Fiflaren. I would say that's a team that played mainly off skill, because crucially, Exist was like an average fragger. Freiburg was an above average fragger in your entry, and then Get Right and Forest were the 2 best players in the world for the part of the game. So it didn't matter that Fiflaren was a very below average fragger. He played the supportive elements in the team. Tactically, it was fairly loose. They was mainly playing off team play. It's classically the Swedish strength. And then having a lot of skill. And the game was fairly limited, so tactics weren't as big a deal. That's why actually Existence was a very dominant IGL at the time because of his tactics. And you could argue he had a better team, but he didn't win because maybe the team play wasn't as much. Like obviously players like Scream and Kenny S had their issues early on. So I would say you got to go with NIP first. Then I would maybe say the Very Games lineup of late 2013 because it had the best, it had like among the most skill ever, all the positions. It had pretty good team play and it had some of the best tactics ever. I won't pick too many here, so I'll pick a couple of the big ones. Obviously, the other ones would be the teams that are considered the GOAT teams, right? So we're talking like Fnatic 2015 and they obviously were in 2014 as well with that lineup. Could have won 4 majors. I once made a nice video about that. Unbelievably clutch. They were actually winning a lot of their titles towards the end when they weren't even really always the best player in the game. They just were the best at winning, if you understand the difference between those two factors. I actually think TSM was a better team. That's why TSM smashed them most of the times. So that was obviously the lineup with Olaf Meister, Krims, JW, Flusher, and Pronax. Then let's take the VP lineup because, again, for me, team play was the thing they were the best at. Skill-wise, I never thought they were the best, but they had all right skill. And crucially for me, it's never that they were the best tactically, but they had their own unique tactical style, and you couldn't really mimic it entirely. You could steal thumb things, but some things you just wouldn't try because you're not Virtus Pro. You don't have the balls, you haven't played together for as many years. Again, they were taking the same blueprint from 1.6 and bringing it to CSGO. And crucially for me, the role swap element and the fact that they would role swap within the game, different IGLs, different entry guys, different AWPers. I thought that's what actually extended their kind of competitive longevity and lifespan way beyond the normal scope of what a team should be able to do, especially a team that isn't the best to ever play. So even though they only won 1 major, what a fantastic team. This team could have won 3 or 4 majors if things had gone differently. They were very, very close to doing so. So I'll also then take, let's see, who else do I want at this point in time? See, the SK and Luminosity teams, I think they contributed a lot in terms of like the newer style of play, like 2- and 3-man games and playing like fundamentally correct and playing man advantage situations out well, which obviously if you have Cold Xavier, you're just going to mow them down and you're just going to put him in the meat grinder. The guy is the Terminator. He just never stops slowly coming at you and beating you down. But they never won that many titles. So the other 2 cores I'll mention would be the Astralis core, obviously particularly this one that we're talking about. That still exists right now. The one that won 3 majors in a row. Basically the best team to ever play the game. What I love about that team is they have good skill. Among this group, I'd say like average skill. They have exceptional team play, some of the very best of all time. And tactically, I think the only team that could ever fuck with them tactically is that 2013 Very Games lineup. And this is relative to your era. Tactically, these 2 teams, in my opinion, were ahead of the game and were changing things. Then the last team I'll mention is actually the Team Liquid lineup that still exists because you can't fuck with what they did in the server. They won 22 series in a row. Only one team's ever won more than that. That was NiP at the beginning of the game. Then after that, you have to factor in that with their 1 loss to Vitality in the CS Summit final, if you take that loss and keep going backwards to when they began their run at IEM Sydney, they won something like 32 out of 33 best of X series in a row. That is just impossible. Even Astralis can't. No one can do that. Nobody can. Like, I think the only team that would have matched that would have been the NIP core at the beginning of the game when the competition was way less. So, obviously, team player-wise, I thought they were fairly average. Actually, of all these lineups here, probably the worst team player-wise. I think in terms of tactics, they were below average for this group. Maybe the worst. I'd put them with NiP in terms of that. But in terms of skill, they are the most skilled of any of these lineups. Like, the closest would be NiP and Very Games, probably. They were just unbelievable. And then Fnatic. This was an unbelievably skilled team. Probably the most skilled to ever play any version of Counter-Strike, if I had to guess, in terms of then having the skill and the results, not just having like great players who did great things elsewhere, but then together didn't work like that Trace SK lineup at the end of 1.6. Then in terms of the most important factor, well, the good thing here is, if you notice, I mean, I didn't use popularity and success, I kind of did like tactics, scale, all the rest of it. I actually don't think that any of these things are really the most important factor. I think it depends on the personnel and the era. In certain periods, tactics is the most important thing. In other areas, when I think like 2016, 2017, that's actually more about just having the most skilled players and the right lineup together. In different points in time, just team play might rule the roost, like the Poles winning all those majors, while people like Khan and Forrest didn't win as many majors, actually. So I think it just depends on the era, and that's one of the things I love about the metagame of Counter-Strike. Because the maps themselves don't change that much, the game doesn't change too much, it means that that the metagame isn't connected to those elements made by Valve. The metagame comes from the players, their minds, and the decisions they make are based on the personnel in their team. So as they change players, as they have different successes up and down, it naturally changes the metagame and how people think of Counter-Strike. TMV23 says, for more than a decade, we saw the big corporate-sponsored Kesper teams like SKT, KT, Samsung, and CJ Entus only compete in very few games, which are, to my knowledge, StarCraft 1 and 2, Special Forces, and League of Legends. There was also the ones, there was like Kart Rider and stuff. There was even Warcraft 3 very briefly before some match fixing kind of fucked that. Recently, some of them expanded into PUBG, and SKT T1, now T1, also signed 3 Hearthstone players just about a month ago. This actually shows how long ago this was. Do you think that the trend towards these comparatively casual games with more elements of randomness will continue in the future, even though that might mean that said teams won't be on the top of the food chain in their respective games like they were in StarCraft and League of Legends? What makes that interesting is, I actually don't think very casual games generally will ever be the biggest esports games. I know it doesn't sound really that legit, because I would consider League of Legends casual compared to something like StarCraft 1 or CSGO. But I do think Koreans generally, they're kind of boffins. Like, they're really nerdy. I think as long as the game gets big there, they'll play StarCraft whether or not it's a fucking super cool casual game or not. So luckily Koreans can be a bit different in that sense. In terms of those teams signing people in other games, the PUBG angle, in my opinion, I think Korea only flexed into that because they got League of Legends and other games, StarCraft, sort of taken away from them, and Overwatch as well for Overwatch League. So they just had to kind of flex and hope PUBG was the future, whereas by the time they even launched PUBG, Fortnite was already out and other games were out. So I think that was actually a failed experiment. I think you've seen the way they approach League of Legends and Overwatch and StarCraft, that actually they are fairly committed to hardcore games and they like games with a lot of skill and strategy, and then they tend to become the best at those games. So I don't think that will be as much of a concern. I do think it's unfortunate they'll basically never be a force in CS. That kind of sucks, but I think actually a game like Valorant, perhaps they will have more, because hopefully League of Legends... Riot Games rather will understand, just like with League of Legends, you have to understand distribution, which Valve never understood in Korea or China for my money. China to some degree for Dota 2, but never CS. So I don't think it's that big a concern for me overall. Also, I will say I don't necessarily know the motivations or how they decide things within those companies. Because remember, those are like giant corporations who are sort of the main sponsor, almost like the title sponsor, but then also own the team. So I've never really understood quite what they want from us. Is it just a marketing exercise? That's what I suspect. Is it also, like in the modern day, do they think there's a path to monetization and making money? I'm not so sure. Because actually Korean esports, for my 2 cents, that doesn't even make any fucking sense, does it? Put it so, they don't make half as much revenue as people would imagine from how it's been presented to you over the past 20 years. Right, Foco von Mongolis says, in both 2018 CSGO majors, so that was which were the 2 majors that year? Right, obviously the Face It major was the second one, and then the first one that year was the Boston major in January. Now, we've seen many teams lose their major legend spots, sure. Some people have attributed this to the old guard falling off and or the scene being generally more competitive. To me, it seems that this is instead likely due mostly to the change in format, which gives the Challenger teams more warm-up / practice than the Legends teams, particularly following the player break. What do you think best explains the high turnover in Legends spots in 2018? I think some of it you have nailed there, like going to Swiss system. Listen, go look at every Swiss system in history. Even best of 3 Swiss system somehow produces a lot more variance than like traditional GSL and best of 3 double elimination. I'm not sure why it is. There's a lot of factors to it, but it just does somehow. So that already makes more unexpected results happen. The fact that the majors are best of 1 Swiss system, at least at this point in time they did, I think also was a problem. Anyone can, well, not anyone, but a lot of teams can win a best of 1, especially depending on what the map veto ends up being. I agree with you. I think playing the Challenger stage sometimes was actually a benefit to a lot of the teams. It's why some of those CIS teams would get super... Like initially, they were just winning from surprise factor. No one knew their playing style. No one knew their tendencies. Then the next week, they're already leveled up. Like some Australis fuckers have just been waiting back, just watching those games. So yeah, I think that was a big factor as well. And I'll also add in, you kind of reference it there, but the idea of having majors after player breaks, like they did with obviously the Christmas break for the Boston major, and then obviously particularly after the player break for the Face It major, yeah, I think that's a massive flaw. I think it's one of the stupidest decisions the pro players ever made. And quite frankly, they probably cost some people some history and some historical placings through their stupidity and just wanting to go to the fucking Maldives for 4 weeks before they play a major. I don't get it myself. I'd want to practice as much as I could beforehand. In terms, Pavel asks, have you read any of Nassim Taleb's books? If so, how have they impacted your personal philosophy? I've only read parts of them. They're not books I've read from cover to cover. Actually, the era when I discovered them was when I actually stopped reading books, every word of them, and feeling like you had to complete them. I just read the parts that seem interesting, or if they catch my attention, I keep reading, and then if I'm not, I skip forwards, or I go to another book. So the key thing is I'm not someone who's that interested, or I'm not involved with investment. Obviously, I know fuck all about markets generally. So I'm reading those books mainly how I can take his philosophy on markets and investment and actually human psychology sometimes, and I'm then trying to apply that elsewhere in life. So that's the thing I found most interesting, concepts like the black swan, like being anti-fragile. I think you can see in my career how being anti-fragile is definitely something you could describe as a consideration of how I've been able to have success, right? Things that would kill other people's careers make mine only more successful and relevant and talked about and interesting for people. And then I kind of get away with it in a way other people don't, right? There's not through coincidence. I didn't trip over and do that a million times in a row, guys. There's a method to the madness. So I would say you don't have to know much about money or finances. First of all, he'll teach you some of it in those books, but it's more to take the philosophy side of it. Also, just as a fun way of writing, right? Kind of a spicy personality and no holds barred sort of guy. Even though, unfortunately, that cliche has been mad worn into the ground with people who don't really deserve it. Hands on keyboard says, now that Dada seems to have made his permanent exit from Tier 1 and 2 League of Legends, how would you revise his career as it had major high early Season 3 and Season 4, hence why he's called the King of Spring, and some very low lows at Season 3 Worlds, Season 5 rather, onwards. I mean, Season 4 Worlds, he was actually pretty decent at, even though that team obviously didn't get out of the group, but they were in the group of death. Yeah, the weird thing about Dada is when he was at his peak, he was overrated in terms of the greatness of his career, because as you said, he would then have slumps that a player with as high a peak as him wouldn't normally have, but he was exceptional in those particular periods when the meta would fit him. A lot of people don't know this. Briefly, actually, while he was in that M3 team in China, he also actually expanded to a bunch of champions you don't think of him on at all, not assassins. Like, he actually got good on some of the majors. But aside from that, he generally seemed to phone it in or lack some of the mental drive. I also heard behind the scenes, basically, the reason he moved to Blue is he was someone who would get into a lot of arguments with people. And even though he had some shot calling components, I think that clashed with the likes of Dandy and Mata. And I don't think it's a coincidence. Dandy and Mata revolutionized League of Legends and had their Worlds win the year they got rid of Dada, and Dada instead went with a different style with the Samsung Blue team, and he was kind of the aggressive element that made up for how passive some of the other parts of that team were. So I think what's interesting to me is he very much defined the styles of his team. He often would be the best player and the primary carrier of his teams. At his peak, he was actually a very clutch player. He was even quite clutch in the OGN Summer Final they lost in 2014 when Samsung Blue could have gone back-to-back and he could have won his third title. So I think this guy actually, he was a very good player at times. In terms of how I revise his career, he's just a player who had great peaks and great valleys. He's a unique player in that sense. I don't think anyone else ever went from like the grave to the top of the mountain to back to the grave to the top of the mountain again. So it's just a shame for me he went over to China. I wish he'd stayed in Korea for many more years and we could have maybe seen this repeat a couple of times. It's just he was somewhat meta-reliant at that point. Shantanu Parwa, he's asking another one, says, building on the topic discussed on By the Numbers, any thoughts on Bondik Tanavi as a replacement for Edward? And then he suggests that his stats are solid, he has some of the best clutch stats, and he's a veteran, he's not too old. Right, obviously, Edward was replaced in the end by Boomich, and then, although technically that was sort of a replacement for Zeus, it just hadn't happened yet, and then you could sort of say Perfecto is replacing Edward, and hence his job is just don't be as shit as Edward, which when he can do, they actually are a really good team. I would say this, yeah, I agree with you. If there was a time where obviously for many, many years they couldn't get Angel and they couldn't get the players that they wanted to, yeah, I actually do think that Bondik replacing Edward in like 2018 would have been a good move. I agree with you. I think the stats were always solid. His skill was decent enough. He was pretty solid in clutches even. Yeah, against lesser teams, but he could maybe have figured that out against top teams. And he was a vet. And he played quite a few years. He's been in some good teams. He played with some top players before in his career. So, and he's a little bit of a spicy guy. He's not the guy who's just going to sit back and just lose, I think. So I think that actually would have been a nice gamble. I would have been up for trying that, quite frankly. Barbara Stanwyck's legs Says, fun spitballing type question. You come into a massive fortune. You've got to tell me how much of this. So I'm going to guess for you, massive's like $100 million, something. We'll not say like $1 million, because if I spend that, I definitely wouldn't spend all that in esports. You decide to set up the year-long TPL, the Pro League or something. I'm not sure what TPL means, actually. TPL Quake Live World Tour. Oh, Foreign Pro League, I assume he's referring to that. It's the fact I have to like discern that, but whatever. We're on the same frequency on that one, mate. 10 stops, then the final. So he's basically structured this, if you notice, like the CPL World Tour from 2005 with Painkiller. Millions in total prize money, also fairly similar. How would you set things up? Tournament formats, stop locations, map pools, tweaks. Right, so this is Quake Live we're doing here. Which, by the way, yeah, if I'm going to do a 1v1 game, I probably would do that. I wouldn't do Quake World. If I did Quake World, I'd do a 4v4 TDM tournament. But let's say we're doing this Quake Live 1v1 tournament, and hopefully with these millions, we're going to get all the players to come back from Quake Champions and take a few years so they can get a good level. Yeah, I would do something similar to what you're saying. I would have it like the CPL World Tour. I think, just like Formula 1, it was a brilliant format because you only play once a month, so you get the rest of the month off to practice and prep and fly the next country, and then the fans get a break for a while and they can talk about the storylines, but then you're playing the same teams and opponents and batting the same field every single month. So it's also very consistent. You get a proper world tour. You get to see who the best is over the tour and then who the rivals are and how people develop or how people fall off. And then you have the big grand finals, which is kind of like a major anyway. So I actually love that format. I agree. I would do a format like that in terms of the circuit. In terms of the tournament formats, what I would do differently is there's two ways I could go here. I would either do the same format every event, so maybe do like a double elimination bracket and it starts with seeding or it has groups into a bracket, or I would do it like a cycle of tournament formats. So I would do, but it's going to be different from how you're going to think. I wouldn't, I think, do it where it's like double in 1 month, and then next month is like fucking single limb was succeeding, and then the next one's like a Swiss system into a what? No, what I would probably do is I would have it like seasons in tennis. So I would have like a season that's just a double a limb. I would have a season that's a bunch of best of ones. I would have a season that's a single limb with great seeding. I would have a season that's a Swiss system into something else. And then for the finals, I'd probably just do a big double limb bracket TI style tournament. So in terms of, because what I think would be fun about that is how it would affect all the different styles of the game and people who are just streaky like strengths or whatever. Spar team can maybe have winning the best of one tournament, but then in the double limb bracket, it's probably going to be Rafa because he can play people twice. And then the great single limb tournament, maybe Cypher if he hits his peak. Like, I think that's what would have been cool. It would have given everyone a chance to show their skill set, but then still you're aggregating all the performance and having that big grand finals. In terms of the time limit, yes, I would actually have moved the time limit up to it depends actually. Here's the thing. I would actually rather genuinely move the time limit up. I'll probably do a video on this. Move the time limit in Quake to 15 minutes like it used to be in Quake 3 and go to best of 3 as opposed to 10 minutes and best of 5. Because even though in best of 5, you in theory can see more maps, you don't get as much play in the maps because from like 6 minutes on, if you've got enough of a lead, you can start fucking with the time and using that on your side. In a 15-minute duel, you can't do that until the very end of the game, mate. So I would say that actually I'd prefer to just see 2 or 3 maps, but 15 minutes, like really hardcore. I also think it would make players like Rafa and Cooler, to some degree Cypher, it would actually make Rafa and Cooler, it would boost them basically. It would make them even stronger because they'd have more time to come back, more time to game plan, more time to play defense, and then get back in control. I think someone like Avec actually, and strengths, would actually suffer a lot more from this time out. Like Avec most famously was someone who would just tilt and fucking GG out the game when he started getting wrecked in the first third of it. In terms of like respawn timers and weapons, right, because it's Quake Live, just to be realistic, I'd probably have to keep it how it is now. If it was up to me, I would actually change Quake Live to be the original way that Quake World was played in NetQuake, which is I would actually have like a 15-second timer on the weapon. So now you can run weapons as well, and you can control weapons and keep people away from weapons. I think that's awesome. I think that's a really cool element. I like that tactically, and again, it promotes tactical play. And if you get the weapons, you have more of a premium in using them. Not just everyone can get a plasma gun or an LG or whatever. I would also, in terms of weapon balancing, I would go a little bit, I wouldn't go as extreme, but I'd go more towards the Quake World end. I'd make the strongest guns, the lightning gun, the rocket launcher, the railgun even stronger. I'd make guns like the shotgun, and I'd make them a little bit weaker or more situational. I, again, like there to be more of a hierarchy to the weapons, and as a result of logic to how the map's played out, or style choices, like I'm a plasma god like Avec, therefore I would go more towards the plasma. away from maybe the LG. In terms of like CPMA physics, I wouldn't do any of that shit. Like, listen, I definitely don't think Quake Live had the best physics, but it had good enough. And by the end, people had mastered them enough that it was definitely fun physics. In terms of talent I'd recruit, that's probably the hardest area because a lot of the people who've done Quake for the last 10 years are the people who have the resume. But I think that they kind of only basically were number 1 and number 2 and number 3 because everyone kind of quit the game who was relevant, like Too Good, other people, Joe Miller, these people. I think it's that really is what boosted them a little bit. So I would try and get Too Good and Joe Miller and DJ Weath and some of the classic people to come back and cast it. I just think that would be a lot of maybe like what was it, Warwich. Yeah, these people were all classics. Yeah, why not? All great people. I'd obviously be there on the analysis desk. I'd try and get other great thinkers about the game to be on the analysis desk. Maybe Vicious, the former UT player, got a very good mind for the game. People like Vu, etc. Some of these people I might have on the desk with me to break the game. DDK, obviously. Daniel Hambraeus says, you sometimes compare things to MMA. I certainly do. Do you watch other martial arts or martial sports like wrestling, taekwondo, kendo, or fencing? No, I don't watch any of them. I know almost nothing about those sports beyond what I've learned about wrestling and taekwondo or striking arts and grappling arts from MMA. MMA is basically my main sport that I watch in that sense. I find the others just not as interesting, and crucially, they don't have the circuit and the massive amount of money pumped into it to make the super athletes that you kind of have now and the real training camps that you need, I think, to tactically be able to approach the game properly. I would say the one thing I don't like about MMA, so just an aside, is I hate the rule scoring system. I wish it was just scored as a whole fight. I think that would absolutely change the sport for the better, and it would promote and incentivize a lot more exciting and high-level fights as opposed to like those bullshit ones. Like the worst one ever was, off the top of my head, I think it was when Machida fought Rashad Evans the second time. Am I thinking the right one here? So the first fight was obviously a banger with that knockout. And from what I'm remembering, I think the second one is the one I'm thinking of, where all they did legitimately was, you know, when people like are testing the range and I punch and you just put your hand out like that over and over again. They just did that, no joke, for like 15 minutes. It was fucking mental. So anyway, just a little aside. David says, I would be interested to know what your opinion is on the concept of firepower within teams in Counter-Strike. While I acknowledge it has some merit, I honestly think it is way overblown, and tactical cohesion and team success has a gigantic opinion on people's impact on people's opinions on a team's firepower. I think if I had to give an example or two, I would say that many people before the rise of ENCE and Furia would say these teams lack firepower. Then after their rise, all of a sudden these star players are super sick gamers or something like that. Yes, generally, this is probably why you fuck with my work, or maybe you even took some of this inspiration from me. This is kind of my philosophy on it as well, which is that the more successful your team is, and especially the more you can play to your tactics and have good team play, it will actually make people overrate your skill. Because when I say that some of those great teams earlier on in the video have enough skill, point is they just have enough skill to activate the tactics and team player. That will then make them the best team. So a team like ENCE, I actually think they didn't have enough skill. And I think Furia didn't actually have enough tactics and definitely not enough team player. So for me, I think that, yes, these players got overrated. Like Keserato, I think, got quite overrated. I think Yuri's the better player of those two. I think he just has sick aim. I think in ENCE, Sergey was definitely overrated, even though he is a good player. And people like Ariel were insanely overrated. And Alu's just Alu. Like, he's just such a known quantity that people will always overrate him. But that's because they like his personality as well and think he has a cool kind of persona in the game. Some of that's not entirely true. Some of it is true. It's just that, again, you have to know him as a person and know which is which. I kind of agree. I think that people definitely overrate the firepower. Probably the best example now is the Astralis team that plays right now. At their peak, people were genuinely making out like they had 5 of the top 10 players in the world, or even 3. Whereas for my money, maybe on their best months, they had 3 of the top 10 players in the world. But most of the time, they probably had 2 of the top 10 players in the world. Because remember, some guy on the 5th best or 6th best team, could have been simple back then at certain points in time, is clearly way better than Dupree or Magisk. Doesn't matter that Astralis has beaten them in the tournaments. So, yeah, I think people definitely overrated that element. I thought people like Elise were better even back then than some of the players on Astralis, even though every fucking idiot would tell me no, right? Then again, they're not here on this channel. Yeah, I agree with you. I think basically, here's the crazy thing. The eye test should tell you that these guys aren't that skilled. The eye test is what makes me really think genuinely, not that I'm some super genius, it's actually, I get disappointed with other people. It makes me think the other experts in the scene, most of them are fucking shit. Even though some of them were pros and have worked years and years themselves in the game and have talked to players a lot, their eye test is garbage. Like, they'll tell you something like Ariel's sick, or they'll tell you that Astralis has 3 of the top 10 players in the world back in some of those past years. Like, the eye test tells you Team Liquid had more skilled players even back then than they do in Astralis. I don't get it at all. So I would just say it's, believe it or not, it is the most overrated aspect, is raw skill, because people have a very poor kind of ability to gauge it, not least because they can't, in their model, try and shadow box and control test group the tactics and the team play and the skill and see what's there and what you add and what you take away and what people bring to the game beyond just having a crosshair and putting it on people and pressing mouse 1 and killing them, right? Spoon-fed 89. If you had to set up a course for people studying tactical styles in CSGO, which 3 IGLs would be on your required watching list? Ooh, I think the fun thing about this is, as an aside, if you want a really long answer to this, I'll go watch when Sean Gares did a talk to Thorin, CSGO Mount Rushmore, where he picked out 4 IGLs, because he picks out IGLs with very distinct styles who kind of mastered their own approach. And the way he explains it, I think if you're just a fan of tactics, you're going to really dig it. You're going to really like it. But here's my version anyway. So I would obviously take the existence style from early CSGO. So we're talking 2012 to, I would say, the middle of 2015, which is when I think he started to fall off and have his own confidence issues. This tactical style was a really nice mixture of anti-stratting, of having a very strong playbook that is not only super deep on like 4 or 5 maps, but you can go anywhere in it. And as a result, it's really hard to read what you're doing mid-round and between rounds. That's why Pronax, the great guy with an amazing loose team, all these weapons to work with, classic skill for mid-round calling, used to routinely lose to Existence, even when Existence had a significantly worse talent base than Pronax, because he was the counter to Pronax's style in that sense. So he was the original great tactician in CSGO. I'd then go with Glaive, who I think is sort of the neo-Existence, as it were, the modern-day Existence. He's fitting a lot of that criteria. Again, he's killing the game. Because he has Zonic and he has a coaching staff behind him, he can expand it to 6 or 7 maps, so he can go to a really crazy level. And then in my opinion, the third person, the funny thing is, I feel like people are going to expect me to say Carrigan here. And I certainly, should I say Carrigan here? I won't actually, because here's the thing. Carrigan, I think, has an interesting style, but I don't think it's tactical as much as it's about reads and then coming up with small tweaks on the fly. So I don't know tactically that should fit as much. Zeus had a nice style. I was always a fan of his, actually. It's basically, for this one, I think it's between Zeus and MSL. Now, you might be like, MSL? MSL's worked with some lesser talents constantly in his career and found ways to grind out those 7, 8 T rounds on seemingly every fucking map. And being able to play certain maps to a very, very high level, being able to go head-to-head with some of the best teams ever, even won tournaments inexplicably at times or without it being expected. So I think MSL's certainly up there. I might say I'll go for Zeus, though. I could have picked MSL to be edgy, but who gives a fuck about that? I'll go with Zeus, because what I love about Zeus is he had a very coherent philosophy and style in the game that he created and built up from 1.6 and then went to CSGO, especially based around the AWPer, based around running the clock down, based around making map control, and then making a read as to where you go next, that I just thought it was so machine-like and systematic. And I will say, one downside is, I think Starix actually did his style better than he did, maybe because he was in the position of being outside of the game, like fucking Ender's game, controlling the shit. But I would say Zeus, because he had such a defined style that, again, like artists looking for the process of another artist, not just the end product, the process of what Zeus is doing is very interesting. So I'd go and look at that if I were you. Right, we're into the last home stretch here. Collier G. Who is for you the shittiest player to have ever played over a long period of time at a lot of tier 1 tournaments in CSGO? Oh, that is tough. Because obviously I'm going to have to come off the top of my head here. I haven't got time to go research it. So I'm going to throw out a few names and then we'll try and pick between them if we can sort them out. So we've got to go with Neo from Virtus Pro. He was really fucking shit for like 2 years towards the end. I mean, he still kept playing till last year, so maybe even 3 years. Really quite bad individually. Even though, yes, he was still win clutches, just fragging-wise, he was terrible. Edward's got to be up there because those last 2 or 3 years for Edward were a fucking nightmare as well. He really went really bad. He not only was terrible fragging and numbers-wise, the eye test was terrible. I'm going to take IGLs out of this equation. Should we go with one more name? You know what? I've got to put Fiflaurin in there. Fiflaurin from Prime NIP, I thought was a pretty bad player. I don't think actually personally he deserved to be in that team. I'm certain that he brought some team play elements, and I know he contributed tactically, and I do think he should have been in NIP if they'd have made him the IGL. I actually think, do you want to know a crazy comment? I think if they actually had switched to Fiflaurin as IGL, and then not gone back after Katowice, that they actually would have had an extended career and would have been the top team for longer and could have battled for the number one spot into the Envious/LDLC and Fnatic TSM periods of time. I actually think that could have extended their lifespan. But as a supportive element and the primary AWPer, I thought he was a fucking terrible player. And it says it all to me that he went like minus 72 kill differential when they won the major ESL1 Cologne. Like, that's a mad anchor. Shikez says, do you think it is possible to be a truly superstar level player without godlike mechanical skill? Are there any examples in the current esports titles? And if so, how have they compensated? That's tough, because one thing that's always tough when we're defining things and using terminology is when you say mechanical skill, most people are going to think you mean just pure tracking aim, or how crazy your flicks are, or how fast you can fire accurately. But I would also say, like, spray is a kind of mechanical skill. It's just it's mixed with technique and intuition, so it's a little bit more tricky than some of those other elements. I mean, I would argue that visualization comes into flicking as well, so that's not entirely pure mechanics. Tracking aim is generally pure mechanics. So the real problem here is, listen, if you want to talk about the most mechanically skilled players ever, Get Right isn't on the level, when you talk about the typical skills, of the Simples, the Nikos, the Forests, those players in history, Ziwu. But I do think, look at the guy's spray. He definitely had strong mechanics in their own. Definitely, let's not pretend like he's an average player who just did it all with his mind and hard work. So I would say that I don't think you can say that actually Get Right doesn't have... Does he have godlike mechanical skill? He kind of does, though, because his spray was very godlike for the first couple of years, guys. He was unbelievably good. He was better than anyone else's and by like a country mile. So I don't think I can count him. So in terms of being a superstar level player, let me think. Where shall I go on this one? It is, but as an exception to the rule. I do think probably to be a superstar level player, godlike mechanics is the threshold that if you can't get to that point, the rest of it won't matter. You'll just be a good player like Dupree, or maybe you'll just be a good player like, let me think. Pasha was a good player without particularly good mechanics. But if you want to be a superstar level player, I think the only ones who I don't think had godlike mechanical skill, I think probably the exception is Cold Zera. I do think he deserves to be considered a true superstar level player. He was unbelievable, but I don't think he has godlike mechanical skill. I think he has good skills, mechanics. I think it's the rest of his game that was amazing. It was being a polished player that made him amazing. Oh, right, shit. He actually did say about current esports titles. So I only listed CS there. Let me list a couple of other examples from other games, just in case CS isn't your shit. So if you're a League of Legends fan, I don't think you can. Again, I think only as an exception. Like, I don't think that High or Doinby, relative to their regions, were ever superstar level players truly. I think they were like just below that. They added implied value elsewhere, but they didn't have the mechanics to do it, in my opinion. Are there any players that never really had this raw godlike mechanical skill? Because the problem is, again, people might think, what about Soaz? Because they don't think they're making crazy outplays. Soaz has, again, very, very high skill level, and at times high mechanics, because you never notice him lacking them. He always seems to be moving at his own pace. It's incredible. So I don't think you can say someone like Soaz. Let me think. A superstar level player without godlike mechanical skill. I think the only thing you could maybe pick would be in League, you could say like the jungle and support sometimes I think didn't have to have mechanical godlike skill. So I would say, for example, Score. I think Score's nowhere near Cacao and fucking Tarzan and Dandy in terms of mechanics, but his fucking mind for the game is bonkers. I mean, even as an AD carry, he was not mechanically sick. I think he's a good example of someone who I thought at times was like a superstar player, at least in his role. In terms of supports, there have been a few who maybe were just brains in the game and didn't have to do much elsewhere. What about for other games? Yeah, if for some odd reason you happen to follow Quake, I would say actually that Thresh and particularly Rafa are amazing examples of superstar best player in the world, GOAT contenders, who I think weren't even close in terms of mechanical skill to even some of their peer group, and even some of the guys coming 6th and 7th at those tournaments back then. Ass Blaster 2000, because of course people who follow my Patreon have names like that. How would you compare covering individual sports versus team sports? What are some aspects that you like or dislike, and do you have a personal preference? My personal preference generally would be to the one-on-one sports. It's just that they're not really a thing anymore. In terms of esports, and in terms of sports, yeah, probably as well, like tennis, snooker, darts. These were generally my favorites. And I only really tend to like the team sports the most. As in, I was naturally drawn to things like the NBA because the individual can dominate more than he can in sports like the NHL, the NFL, etc. I just learned to like those games once I got to know the tactical elements and the drafting elements and that sort of thing. So what I like about team sports is team dynamics. How do you make a team? How do you position your strengths and weaknesses into different roles? How do you play to the meta or away from it or innovate the meta? Again, GM and team building concepts, how you work emotionally and mentally together. What I like about individual sports is it's all on your backs. You have to be clutch to win. You have to be the best usually to win. You have to be able to overcome that opponent that always beats you. Otherwise, you'll never get past him to that point in the tournament. What's good is they've got really different strengths and aspects to watch. The other good thing about the individual thing is, whereas the team's about how it fits together, the individual thing's about how you complete your skill set and master the game. So that's just really cool in and of itself. Last question is going to be Jerky's Minion, my boy. And this is one that isn't an esports one, but I've answered it anyway. And I actually did a mild bit of homework for this because he says, bit late, but what are some of your favourite movies? By the way, this year I think I'll actually do the Patreon from my Thorin's side channel if anyone wants to get involved with that. And it'll be a good way to incentivize me to put out more content on that channel, which I've kind of been slacking on because I'm not obligated to do it. Now, luckily here, Jerky's Minion, I'm not one of those morons who just lists off movies like, I like The Bicycle Thieves, just to try, Stalker's my favourite movie, just to try and seem cool and academic and intellectual. I'm genuinely going to tell you my actual favourite movies that I think are both good and very enjoyable to watch. I could rewatch any of these movies 10 times and not lose my enjoyment or love for them or stop thinking they're great movies. So, unlike a lot of other people, I have a top 10 list of movies. Now, they're not in order, but here are the 10. There's The Prestige from 2006, which was directed by Christopher Nolan. One of the most godlike stories ever. I would describe that and a lot, actually, of the movies of Christopher Nolan as Alan Moore-esque, if you know Alan Moore, the comic book writer, because it's all about every component of it fits together in a clockwork fashion and comes together in a very satisfying manner. And this was just the best example of it. I think it's a very underrated movie. The Fountain from the same year, and funnily enough also with Hugh Jackman, by Darren Aronofsky. I was a big Aronofsky fan from his early work, not as much later, but still watch him. Another movie that fits together, but this one has more of the magical realism and more of the raw art of visual imagery and trying to do creative things that almost go into the mythological level. I thought this is actually one of the most, almost like spiritual, one of the most spiritually satisfying movies I've ever seen in my life. One of my favorites. These are my two favorites. Then these are the other movies that I'm going to put in there. The other 8 movies are going to be Ashes of Time Redux from 2008 by Wong Kar-wai, one of my absolute favorite directors. Just an incredible, sumptuous visual treat. The culture of the movie is so alien to a Westerner that you will be thrown by it, but then allured by it, but then disgusted by it, and you'll never be quite sure where you are because it's just an alien world to you. And then I also think some of the little chapters and stories within it, they're a mixture of fun, or they're a mixture of like compelling, or some of them are very emotional, or some of them are almost fantastical. Like the one particularly with the brother and sister, if you know what I'm talking about. My favourite chapter on that one, probably the one about the guy who drinks the wine that makes him forget everything. That's a pretty good one, I think. Old Boy from 2003 by Park Chan-wook, Korean movie. Wong Kar-wai is from Hong Kong, I believe, by the way. This is obviously a classic revenge movie. If you've never watched it before, what I like about this movie is it's a movie that captures, for me, the best quality of the best graphic novels. Where you build up a story, you can do anything you want in a graphic novel. You have way less restrictions. This movie's crazy, the premise. And then the twists come out of nowhere and are utterly crazy and would just not be allowed, I think, in a lot of Western movies. So I won't spoil any of it. It's a must watch, and try not to see anything or read anything before you go and watch it. This is an example, when I list some of these next movies, by the way, where you're going to see that I am legit and authentic, and I'm not a guy who just picks like, I've got to go with Annie Hall by, Woody Allen. Like, I like that movie, but it's not going to be my top 10 movies of all time. I'm going to go with Gladiator from 2000 by Ridley Scott. Now, to a lot of you, Ridley Scott, Russell Crowe, Gladiator, it's a bloody popcorn. It isn't. What's great about it is it was able to have the success of a popcorn movie and get that position in mainstream culture. It's a fantastic movie about antiquity and follows a classical Hollywood script that works off basically Greek tragedy and drama. I think this is a fucking sick movie and Russell Crowe kills it. One of the most satisfying movies ever. I will say, don't watch the extended director's cut. Some of the scenes they put in actually made it worse. Watch either the theatrical one or try and find one of the DVD era director's cuts. Those are the best versions, the most satisfying ones for my money. Gattaca from 1997 by whoever whatever his name was. One of the most underrated movies of all time. Fantastic sci-fi movie. Is so totally about sci-fi, but then actually secretly really about the human condition. If you're anyone who wants some inspiration, it's just a great movie for that. Heat from 1995. I often say this is my favourite movie along with The Prestige by Michael Mann, obviously. One of the best filmed movies of all time, one of the best heist/crime movies of all time, one of the best casts of all time, incredible performance by De Niro and Pacino, but also by many other people, almost perfectly cast as a movie, almost doesn't miss a beat as a movie, and again, on the one hand, tragic elements to it, but also incredibly compelling and satisfying. One of the best endings of a movie I think I've ever seen in my life. The Usual Suspects from 1995 by Bryan Singer. Also a movie that if you like clever plots and you like misdirection and you like interesting casts of people, it just keeps you guessing all the time and keeps you interested. You never quite know where it's going and also has a fantastic ending. One of the best of all time, really. Clerks from 1994. See, I'm not afraid to go what you might call lowbrow. I think it's just a hilarious movie. It's just a great movie. It makes you feel awesome. It is funny. It's of a certain era, which obviously was when I was a young person. I was becoming a teenager around that time. It's, for my money, the best Kevin Smith movie, and it was made for an incredibly low budget because it doesn't need high production value or big actors. It just gets it done with the script and then some of the unique characters in it. Finally, I'm going to go with actually what I think was a made-for-TV movie, which is the 1993 movie Rudy by Anspaug, was the director. Probably the most inspirational movie to ever be made. You don't have to like American football. You don't even have to like Sean Astin or any of the people. I mean, fucking young Vince Vaughn's in it, by the way, and so is Jon Favreau as like a fat kid. So some interesting cameos that you'll notice in this movie, but one of the most inspirational movies of all time. There we go. I will be back pretty soon, actually. Go to the Patreon page and you'll see the next AMA questions thread. Let's get rolling. And as I said, I'll be reaching out to some of you to gather some questions to make up for the past missed episodes. This video was kindly supported by Alexander Rao, Dean Tanglis, JDubs, NateDOhDoubleG, Tobias Bernasconi, and as always, a special thanks goes out to my boy Jerky's Minion. Would you like to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Maybe you want to ask me a question for my monthly video AMA. Do you want teasers? Who are the guests on the upcoming talk shows, interviews I have? Maybe you want to take part in one of those Patreon donator discussions with me. Well, for any of the above perks and more, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today at the Patreon link in the description box below.